They were halfway through jackhammering my retaining wall when I pulled into the driveway. No notice, no warning, just some guy in a neon vest yelling over the noise, "HOA order, sir, step back." And the best part? That wall was the only thing keeping my hillside from sliding straight into my living room. Let me back up for a second, because this kind of madness doesn't just drop out of the sky. I bought this house 8 years ago, back when I finally admitted to myself that I was burnt the hell out. I used to be a structural inspector, commercial, big projects, bridges, stadiums, office complexes. I was the guy with the clipboard, crawling under steel beams in the freezing rain, pointing at things and telling a bunch of dudes twice my size, "Yeah, tear it out and do it again." Made a decent living. Stress nearly killed me. There was this one site, a shopping complex out by the interstate. I caught a shortcut in the rebar layout on a cantilevered deck, called it out, and the foreman told me word for word, "Nobody's gonna die from a shortcut." 3 months later, before they could even finish the facade, the deck collapsed. No one got killed, thank God, but it was the last straw for me. I turned in my badge, cashed in my PTO, and walked off the site without a plan. A couple months later, I took a job teaching building codes and structural safety at the local community college. Pays less, but I sleep better. My students think I'm a hard ass. They're right. Anyway, the house. I found it on a weird little cul-de-sac up in the hills just west of town. Not fancy, not new, but solid bones. And it had something I couldn't ignore. Silence. Real silence. No trains, no sirens, no guy next door revving his Camaro at 2 a.m. The only downside? The backyard ended in a steep incline, one of those wide, tree-spotted slopes that look pretty in summer and turn into a riverbed every time the clouds get pissy. The previous owners had done the classic suburban thing. Throw down a few railroad ties, plant some ground cover, and pray. It was fine for photos, not so much for physics. First winter I spent there, we had 3 straight days of rain. On the second morning, I looked out the kitchen window and saw half the topsoil slide off like it was on buttered glass. It didn't hit the house, but it damn well could have. So I did what I do, assessed the problem, ran the numbers, called in favors. I brought in a soil engineer from my old contacts, did a full slope stability analysis, and designed a retaining wall system tailored to that grade, that soil type, and that water table. Nothing fancy, no exposed concrete blocks or fake rock panels, just real, poured concrete with reinforced steel, gravel backfill, proper French drains, and geogrid reinforcement buried deep into the slope. I didn't cut corners, I pulled the permits, I paid for inspections, I even had the final sign-off from the county engineer framed and hanging in my damn garage next to my wrench set. Cost me just under $30,000, worth every penny. After the install, the land was stable, bone-dry during storms, not a crack in the wall after 2 major rain seasons. I planted a couple low-maintenance shrubs up top, let the natural vegetation take over the slope, and basically forgot about it. One less thing to worry about. And you know what? No one from the HOA ever said a single word about it. Not for 7 whole years. Not when I installed it. Not when I submitted the permit copies to their office for records. Not even when I offered to help my uphill neighbor, Carol Jean, stabilize her side when I noticed her drain line was dumping right onto the hill. They ignored it. Until suddenly, they didn't. And when they came, they didn't knock. They brought rebar cutters, a rented jackhammer, and a 2-page memo about visual cohesion. Alright, so here's where things start to get weird. The first red flag, and I mean the real one, not just some passive-aggressive newsletter about lawn height, showed up last spring. I came home from work, same as usual, and there was a bright orange violation slip taped to my mailbox like it was some kind of eviction notice, big bold letters across the top, notice of noncompliance, level 2. Level 2? I didn't even know we had levels. I thought they just yelled at you once and then sent a fine. Apparently we've upgraded to the DEFCON system, so I pull it off and read it right there in the driveway, and I swear to you, I had to read the thing 3 times just to confirm that yes, they were serious. It said, and I quote, "Retaining structure is inconsistent with Community Aesthetic Standards per HOA Design Directive 23B. Community Aesthetic Standards, my ass. They listed a bunch of vague garbage like visual cohesion, approved materials, and sloped integration protocols. It sounded like someone swallowed a thesaurus and then panicked. At the bottom, they gave me 30 days to either submit an approved redesign plan or schedule removal. And if I didn't comply, daily fines of $75 plus legal action. Real neighborly. Now keep in mind, this wall, it's not some crumbling eyesore made of cinder blocks and hopes. It's clean, solid, plain gray concrete. Half of it's buried underground. You can barely even see the damn thing unless you're standing at the edge of my lawn doing deep knee bends. So I did what any halfway rational human would do. I walked 2 blocks over to the HOA office, violation slip in hand, and asked very politely, "What the hell is this?" And that's when I met Marlene. Marlene Beckett, HOA president. 60-something, tight gray bun, power blazer, even on a Tuesday. She smiled like a cobra and said, "Oh, you're Mr. Halbrook. Yes, we've been reviewing some of the older structural elements in the neighborhood, and your wall came up." I said, "Came up how?" And she did that thing where she tilts her head like she's listening, but really she's rehearsing her TED Talk in her brain. It's just, well, it's very utilitarian, isn't it? Not really in harmony with the updated community vision. We're trying to move toward more natural materials, stone, tiered landscaping, that sort of thing. I told her very calmly that the wall wasn't some DIY weekend mistake. It was permitted, engineered, built to code, and keeping the entire goddamn hillside from collapsing into my basement. But she just nodded like I was explaining what a toaster was. "We totally understand, Mr. Halbrook, but aesthetics matter. This isn't just about safety, it's about cohesion." Cohesion. I left that office more confused than angry. I figured maybe it was a mix-up. Maybe someone flagged the wrong address or hadn't seen the permits. So I went home, pulled out the paperwork, permits, soil reports, stamped approvals, and made copies. I highlighted everything that said compliant, approved, completed. I even added a sticky note that said, "Let me know if you need anything else." Man, I dropped the whole bundle off at their office the next morning. And I didn't hear a word back for 3 months. Not a call, not a letter, not an email, nothing. Which would have been fine, except the next time I heard from them, they weren't asking for clarification. They were holding a jackhammer. About a month after I dropped off that paperwork, certified permits, stamped inspections, and enough documentation to put a city planner to sleep, I figured the whole thing had blown over. Or at least stalled long enough for someone with a brain to look at the file and say, "Oh, never mind." Boy, was I wrong. The next real escalation came on a random Tuesday. I got home from work, long day, 2 back-to-back labs, and a kid who nearly lit a PVC pipe on fire, and the first thing I noticed was that the back gate to my yard was wide open. Which was weird because I always keep it locked. There's no through path, no reason anyone would be back there. I walk around the side of the house and stop dead. My retaining wall, the wall I built, the wall that held that whole slope together for nearly a decade, was gone. Not completely gone, not vanished into thin air, gone, but demolished, like someone had taken a concrete saw, a sledgehammer, and just gone to town. About a third of the top tier was missing entirely. Chunks of broken concrete stacked neatly off to the side like souvenirs. The weep holes were clogged with debris. The gravel fill had been scraped out, and the slope behind it had already started to sag like a tired mattress. It looked like a job half done by someone who didn't know what they were messing with. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, just blinking at it, like my brain couldn't actually process what I was seeing. And then I heard it, power tools still going on the other side of the yard. I walked over the rise, and there they were. 3 guys in neon vests, one with a rented jackhammer, another stacking broken rebar like they were cleaning up after a kid's art project. No signage, no permit tape, just wreckage. I asked loudly what the hell they were doing. One guy didn't even pause, just yelled over the noise, "Work order from the HOA, sir, Visual Compliance Initiative." I said, "You're tearing out a structural retaining wall. This isn't lawn edging. This holds up my hill." He shrugged, like I'd just asked if he wanted fries with that. I called the HOA office on the spot. No answer. I left a message that started reasonable and ended somewhere around lawsuit. Then I called the city. They said the HOA didn't pull any new permits, and as far as the city was concerned, no changes should have been happening on that property without owner approval. Which, fun fact, I didn't give. By the time the crew packed up for the day, about 40% of the wall was gone. They didn't even seal off the exposed soil. Just left it open, like a half-done excavation in an Indiana Jones movie. And sure enough, because the universe has impeccable comedic timing, we had rain. Not a downpour, just 2 steady days of that cold, sideways drizzle that soaks into everything. I went out every few hours to check the slope. I even threw down a tarp and some temporary erosion mesh, but it wasn't enough. 3 nights later, at 2:30 in the damn morning, I woke up to a sound that felt wrong in my chest before my brain could figure it out. It was like the earth exhaled. I ran downstairs barefoot, opened the back door, and the entire middle section of the slope had given way. Mud, rocks, yard debris, it had all come down. Not a full landslide, but enough to shove against the house, bury the window wells, and shear off half my damn garden. The wall had been doing its job. And now it wasn't there. I spent the next 6 hours in rain boots with a shovel, trying to divert water away from the foundation and clear the vents. I was soaked, furious, and operating on caffeine and vengeance. The next day, I called my insurance company, and this part still pisses me off. They said the damage was outside the scope of coverage because the failure resulted from unpermitted alteration of soil retaining structures. Translation? Not our problem. I asked if I could appeal. They said, yes, but you'll need to prove negligence or third-party interference. Oh, don't worry, I said. I plan to. So the morning after the slope gave out, I looked like hell. Mud-caked boots, bloodshot eyes, one pant leg torn because I slipped on a buried sprinkler head at 3 a.m., and I marched into the HOA office looking like I was auditioning for a Civil War reenactment. I didn't come to yell. I didn't even come to threaten. I came with a folder, a fat one, copies of everything, original permits, engineering reports, construction invoices, soil test results, the city's sign-off, photos before and after the wall, and a fresh set of prints showing the mud that now occupied a good 20 feet of my backyard. The receptionist, Amanda, 20-something, always chewing gum and typing like she's texting, looked up and blinked like I'd walked in holding a live chicken. I need to speak with Marlene, I said. She's not in right now, Amanda said, dragging out each word like I was bothering her Netflix queue. It's urgent. She's in meetings today. Then she can meet with me right now. 10 minutes later, I was standing in the HOA boardroom across the table from Marlene Beckett, queen of the potted succulents, wearing a blazer like she was hosting a TED Talk on suburban authoritarianism. She gave me a tight-lipped smile like this was a casual check-in. Mr. Halbrook, what can we do for you today? Oh, I don't know. Maybe stop destroying my property. But I kept it calm. I laid the folder on the table and slid it over like it was a stack of classified CIA files. You ordered the demolition of a fully permitted, structurally critical retaining wall on my property, without notice, without a permit, and without my consent. She didn't even blink. Instead, she pulled out a neatly stapled packet labeled Architectural Review Report and said, your structure was found to be non-compliant with updated neighborhood standards. Those standards don't override city permits. You're not a building authority. Our covenant allows for the enforcement of visual uniformity under Section 8.4 of the Community Guidelines. I leaned in. Visual uniformity doesn't trump slope stabilization, and your enforcement just caused a minor landslide that damaged my foundation. She gave a little shrug like I'd just told her my mailbox was crooked. Mr. Halbrook, your wall was an outlier. Several homeowners complained. We had to take action to protect the aesthetic and property values of the neighborhood. I took a deep breath because I genuinely wasn't sure whether to scream or laugh. You protect property values by preventing landslides, not causing them. That's when Eric Dobbins walked in, the so-called landscape consultant. Khaki pants, smug little beard, and the posture of someone who Googles terms during meetings and pretends he's an expert. Oh yeah, he said, flipping through my folder like it was a takeout menu. We flagged your wall during the topographical sweep. It didn't blend with the surrounding soil profile. I blinked. You mean, it did its job? Marlene stepped in again. Mr. Dobbins has extensive experience with naturalistic slope solutions. Does he have an engineering license? I asked. Silence. Because removing a load-bearing retaining wall without a permit isn't naturalistic, it's negligent. They didn't respond. They didn't deny it. Just gave me the bureaucratic smile, the kind that says, you can shout all you want, we've got a form for that. I left before I said something that had cost me bail. Over the next 3 weeks, I tried every peaceful channel I could. I wrote a formal complaint. No reply. I emailed the board. Auto response. I showed up at the next community meeting with photos and documentation. Marlene refused to put me on the agenda. I called the city's building department. They said since the HOA did the demolition and it was on private property, it was a civil dispute. I contacted my insurance again. They still needed proof of third-party negligence in writing. From the HOA, guess who wouldn't give me one? Meanwhile, the mud in my yard hardened into a crusty wave of sediment. The foundation guy I hired said the shifting soil had cracked part of the footing near my crawl space. Estimated repair, $19,800, not counting landscaping, not counting erosion control. I was trying to play nice. I really was. I followed the rules, filed the paperwork, used my inside voice, and the entire time they treated me like a nuisance. Like I was the problem. Like the fact that their recklessness had cost me almost 20 grand and turned my slope into a geological hazard was some kind of style preference. That's when I stopped trying to fix this with folders and started planning something else. Because clearly if I wanted results, I was going to have to bury them in facts. Here's the thing about me. I don't bluff. I don't throw tantrums. And I don't do revenge fantasies. But I do research. So after weeks of HOA stonewalling me like I was asking to build a water slide made of human bones, I decided to dig. Not into the mud. I'd already done enough of that. But into them. I started with Eric Dobbins, our landscape consultant, the guy who apparently had enough authority to demolish a structural retaining wall without a permit, a soil analysis, or so much as a heads up. I Googled him first. That got me a website built on some janky template from 2008. All trees and earth tones. His bio said things like certified in sustainable green slope dynamics and experienced in organic structural integration. A lot of words that sounded smart and meant nothing. So I started calling around, quietly. I contacted the state licensing board. Told them I was checking credentials before hiring a consultant. Not a lie, technically. Turns out, Eric Dobbins has no engineering license, no contractor's license, no erosion control certification, nothing. He's just a guy with a shovel and a vocabulary. Okay, that's something. Then I ran a business lookup. His LLC, Verdant Earth Solutions, because of course it's called that, was registered last year. Not 10 years ago like his website claimed. No employees, no insurance bond, no listed certifications. He filed as a sole proprietor using a P.O. box in another county. Still not the twist. Hold on. While I was on the Secretary of State's site, I figured, what the hell, let's look up the HOA itself. That's when things got interesting. See, HOAs are required to file their governing documents and leadership rosters annually. They're also required to vote on amendments, especially ones that affect property rights or visual compliance policies. That Design Directive 23B, the one Marlene kept waving around like it was the 10 Commandments, never voted on, never filed. I double-checked with the county records office. I even paid for a digital copy of every amendment they filed in the last 5 years. Design Directive 23B was nowhere. No mention of retaining walls, no approved visual uniformity measures, no vote logs, nada. But wait, it gets better. Marlene Beckett's HOA president tenure technically expired 2 years ago. There was supposed to be an election. It was never held. So not only was the directive fake, but the person enforcing it was doing so without a legitimate title. And it still wasn't the best part. The actual twist came when I was chatting with Carol Jean. You remember, my older neighbor, whose own slope started shifting after mine, was dug up. She stopped me one afternoon while I was out clearing debris and handed me an old printout. Said she wasn't sure it mattered, but she thought I should see it. It was a newsletter, an old one, dated 4 years back. HOA Winter Bulletin, just a little black and white PDF printed on glossy paper. On page 2, under Community Notes, there was a paragraph about a special project proposed by a certain board member's nephew, an eco-landscaping program designed to naturalize hillside lots and eliminate legacy construction that disrupts slope integrity. Guess who the nephew was? Eric Dobbins. Marlene had been pushing his consulting quietly for years, selling it as sustainability, helping him land jobs around the neighborhood by quietly declaring stuff out of compliance and then nudging homeowners toward Eric for solutions, all under the table. I checked property permits on 3 other houses in the HOA. 2 had paid him for native slope restoration. One of them had a collapsed side garden. Another had a retaining wall replaced with terraced mulch. Both had submitted complaints that went nowhere. They weren't just clueless, they were running a racket. Marlene illegally extended her position, used that fake authority to create a fake directive, and used that to funnel jobs to her unlicensed nephew. Jobs that literally caused land movement. And me? I was the first one to say no and not fold. Well, now I had a new folder, and this one wasn't going to the HOA. It was going somewhere a little higher up. So once I connected all the dots, Eric's fake credentials, Marlene's expired authority, the non-existent vote on their so-called directive, I didn't yell. I didn't storm their next board meeting with a megaphone and a pitchfork. I did something way more dangerous. I sat down, made a list, and started building a paper trail. Because if there's one thing I know, hell, if there's one thing I taught, it's that systems collapse under the weight of their own documentation. You just have to know where to look and how to make the right people look with you. Step 1. Lawyer. I called Sonia Lerman, a local HOA attorney with a reputation for being precise, polite, and borderline terrifying. She didn't take walk-ins, but I had her email from a former student who used to clerk at her firm. I sent her a message with the subject line, "Illegal demolition plus falsified HOA enforcement. Seeking consultation." She called me back within 2 hours. I laid out everything, what happened, what I'd found, what I could prove. I told her I wasn't looking for some grand courtroom battle right away. I just wanted my wall back, my foundation repaired, and for someone to finally hold these people accountable. She listened quietly, then said, Mr. Halbrook, what you have is civil liability, administrative misconduct, and, depending on the payment structure between Ms. Beckett and Mr. Dobbins, possible fraud. But to move anything forward, you're going to need more than theory. You're going to need airtight evidence and an official complaint that forces jurisdiction. HOA laws murky. City code? Not so much. So I built it. Step 2. Compile the dossier. Over the next month, yes, full month, I worked nights and weekends gathering everything. Not just my situation, but the neighbors who'd been targeted before me. I went full forensic mode. I filed a public records request on the HOA's permit submissions. I requested HOA board meeting minutes from the last 5 years. I called the City Code Enforcement Office and asked very casually how many demolition permits were pulled by the HOA in the last 3 years. Spoiler, 0. I interviewed the guy down the block who had a naturalized slope that collapsed in 2021. I pulled Eric Dobbins' business filings, tax records, and contractor status. I got a notarized letter from my soil engineer stating that the removal of the retaining wall was the direct and sole cause of the slope failure. And I documented every single communication I had with the HOA, every ignored email, every unanswered complaint, every vague statement. It took 5 weeks. And then I did what Marlene probably never imagined I'd do. I filed a formal complaint with the County District Attorney's Office, naming both her and Dobbins. Fraud, unlicensed work, destruction of permitted structure, civil negligence, and conspiracy to misrepresent authority. I sent the same file to the State Board of Contractors. They have no patience for people pretending to be engineers. I CC'd the City Inspector's Office, the Municipal HOA Oversight Committee, and, just for fun, the Local Property Insurance Regulatory Board. Then I printed 10 copies, bound them, and sent one certified to the HOA's lawyer. That was a Friday. The following Tuesday, I got a knock on the door. It wasn't the HOA. It wasn't a city official. It was a guy in a button-up and windbreaker with a county seal on his badge, asking if I had time to walk him through the slope damage and answer a few follow-up questions. So, yeah, I had a plan. And now, it had a paper trail. And an audience. You ever watch a domino fall in slow motion? That exact moment when it tips, just a hair, but you know the whole row's about to go? Yeah, that was me standing on my porch watching the county investigator step over the mud-crusted edge of my yard with a clipboard in one hand and a GoPro strapped to his chest. And I'll tell you right now, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel smug. I felt exhausted, because I knew I wasn't winning yet. I was just finally not shouting into the void. The county guy, real polite, name was Jeff, spent 2 hours with me that afternoon. He took photos of the slope, measured the erosion line, reviewed my permits, even took a soil core right near where the footing used to be. I showed him the paper trail, the demolition date, the email silence, the HOA's fake directive, all of it. He nodded a lot, took notes, asked sharp questions, but the moment he raised an eyebrow was when I mentioned Eric Dobbins billing HOA funds for consulting while holding no license. Is that documented? He asked. Line 7 on page 34, I said, flipping open the binder like a waiter presenting a wine list. He smirked. You're not new to this. Nope, I said, but I'm real tired of being polite about it. Over the next week, things started shifting fast. The state licensing board emailed me a formal notice. Eric Dobbins had been issued a cease and desist for operating as a licensed erosion control consultant without credentials. They also flagged his LLC for review. Apparently, claiming engineering experience without a license is a big no-no. Then I got a letter from the Municipal Code Office confirming that HOA had no permits on file for any demolition activity over the past 3 years. Now, this is where it gets fun. I didn't stop with the legal route. I knew public pressure could do what papers sometimes couldn't. So I did what every rational, ticked-off homeowner does when the HOA screws them sideways. I went to the media, not the big guys. I'm not that delusional. But I sent an email with documents attached to a local investigative reporter, Eileen Graft, who ran a column called Suburbia Uncovered. Half HOA horror stories, half bureaucratic exposés. This was her Olympics. She replied within a day. You available for an interview Thursday morning? Oh, I was available. I showed up with photos, quotes, 3 neighbor contacts who were willing to go on record, and a piece of broken rebar from my former retaining wall like it was Exhibit A in a murder trial. Eileen was giddy. She said the story would run in the weekend edition. I figured maybe a few hundred people would read it. Instead, the damn thing went viral. Locally, at least, someone posted it on Nextdoor, and by Sunday, half the HOA was in an uproar. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd been steamrolled. A couple neighbors who'd stayed quiet for years because they didn't want to cause trouble finally came forward. One had paid Eric $6,000 for natural slope restoration that killed every single plant in her yard. Another got fined $500 for a retaining border approved in writing back in 2016. And one guy, he got a violation notice while deployed overseas. Yeah, classy. By the next HOA meeting, the vibe had shifted. Normally 5 people showed up, this time closer to 50. And I wasn't coming alone. Carol Jean showed up with printouts of emails she'd sent the board, ignored. Julian, my student, brought a before-after diagram showing slope stability data that made half the room go pale. Even the old guy across the street who hadn't spoken more than 2 words in a decade stood up during open comments and said, "What you people did to that man's property was criminal." The best part? Marlene wasn't there. She sent a statement read aloud by some poor substitute board member who looked like he wanted to melt into his folding chair. It was full of buzzwords. Good faith, vision, environmental intent. But no apology, no responsibility. Which is probably why halfway through the meeting 2 county investigators walked in. No drama, no handcuffs, yet. Just questions. They asked for a copy of the minutes, asked who approved the slope removals, asked who authorized payments to Eric Dobbins, and this one got a gasp, asked to speak to someone with current legal authority to represent the HOA. Crickets. Because guess what? Turns out Marlene's extension of term wasn't just unofficial, it violated the HOA's own bylaws. There wasn't a legal president at all, just someone squatting in power, pushing fake directives, and cutting checks to family. From that point forward, the board went into full panic mode. Emergency meetings, lawyered-up statements, clarification emails about policies. They even tried to claim my wall had never been fully documented. I replied by emailing them a 46-page PDF of everything, CCing the city, the state board, the DA, and the journalist. Subject line, per your gaslighting. Within a month, both Marlene and Eric were under formal investigation, and for the first time since this whole circus started, I could finally take a breath. Not a victory breath. Not yet. But one deep enough to know, the slope wasn't the only thing sliding. Their whole damn house of cards was going with it. The public part? Oh yeah, that was something else. Look, I'm not one for the spotlight. I don't post rants online. I don't chase drama. But when a county investigator shows up at your HOA's open meeting and half the neighborhood starts whispering your name like you're the guy who finally took down the Death Star, you start getting used to attention real fast. It started slow, a couple neighbors knocking on my door just to say, "Hey man, sorry you had to go through all that." One lady brought me banana bread. Another guy offered to lend me his shop vac, like that was some sort of solidarity gesture. Which, honestly, it kinda was. But then things kicked up a notch when Eileen Graff dropped her second article. The headline? HOA president used nepotism and fake directives to profit from slope demolitions, say county officials. It was everywhere. Local Facebook groups, community bulletin boards, even the morning AM talk radio people picked it up. I was driving to campus one day and nearly spit my coffee when I heard a host say, "If you're in Westview Estates and your retaining wall is missing, don't panic, it's just eco-aestheticism, courtesy of Eric Dobbins." By the next HOA meeting, an emergency session they tried to schedule quietly, over 60 people showed up. Marlene, not present. Eric, also missing in action. Instead, some poor interim board member, Dave something I think, stood at the front with a microphone like a deer caught in a courtroom. He tried to open with a soft, "We're here to listen," but he didn't make it past sentence 2 before someone yelled, "Then where's Marlene?" And, oh man, the floodgates opened. One neighbor stood up and read a letter from their lawyer demanding repayment for landscape damages. Another waved around a copy of their slope restoration invoice, shouting, "He killed every plant I had and charged me $4,000 to do it." Carol Jean got a standing ovation after calmly listing the 3 times she tried to warn the board about slope movement, and got told she was not qualified to assess erosion. I didn't even say anything at first. I just sat in the second row and watched. But then the city inspector walked in. Not just one, 2. One from building and safety, one from the planning department. They didn't say a word. Just sat down with clipboards and took notes. Half the board went visibly pale. Then came the moment. Interim Dave cleared his throat and said, "As of this evening, the board has voted unanimously to place Marlene Beckett on indefinite administrative leave pending investigation." You could feel the tension leave the room like someone popped a balloon. Then he added, "We have also terminated all contracts with Verdant Earth Solutions, effective immediately." Cue the second round of applause. Someone asked if there would be a financial audit. Dave didn't even hesitate. already underway. Then, get this, they turned to me and asked if I would be willing to serve on the reconstruction committee for updating HOA bylaws. I said, I'll pass on the politics, thanks. But I'll happily consult on the engineering section, gratis, with one condition: no one touches another damn retaining wall without a permit. People laughed, but I meant every word. A week later, a formal report was released by the county DA's office. It named Marlene and Eric in an active investigation for abuse of HOA authority, unlicensed contracting, destruction of permitted structures, and, you're gonna love this, wire fraud, because apparently they funneled HOA payments through a dummy business account set up under Eric's girlfriend's name. Their assets were frozen pending the outcome. Eric's business vanished from the internet overnight. Marlene's lawyer issued a PR statement so vague it might as well have been written by ChatGPT on Ambien. The kicker: 2 months later, at the next general HOA assembly, a city official came to personally apologize to the community. They admitted that city oversight failed to catch the lack of permits sooner and offered to waive certain fees for slope inspections going forward. I didn't speak that night, but when I walked out, I heard someone behind me say, "He's the reason that wall came down, and the reason all of this stood up." It wasn't applause, it wasn't hero worship. It was better. It was quiet respect. These days, things are quiet again. Not the eerie kind of quiet you get before a storm, just the normal kind. Birds, sprinklers, the occasional dog losing its mind over a squirrel, the kind of quiet I moved here for in the first place. The yard took a while to fix. I ended up hiring the same crew that helped me pour the original retaining wall all those years ago. 2 of the guys even remembered the project. One of them said, "Didn't think we'd be back here unless the apocalypse hit." I told him, "You weren't far off." We rebuilt the wall, this time with a little extra reinforcement and a not-so-subtle concrete etching that reads "compliant as hell" along the backside. You can't see it unless you know where to look, but it makes me smile every time I walk past it. The slope's stable now, so's the crawl space, and so am I. HOA's been quiet, too. New leadership, new policies, actual votes. They even posted minutes from the last board meeting on time. I didn't run for anything. I don't want to run anything. But I helped rewrite some of the new language around property modification approvals, and yeah, they finally added a clause that says no structure can be altered without a city permit and homeowner consent. Imagine that. Carol Jean stopped by last week with cookies, said her new retaining wall passed inspection, and she finally feels like she can sleep when it rains. I offered her the number for my guys, told her they'd give a Survived Marlene discount. She laughed so hard she had to sit down. As for Marlene and Eric, last I heard, charges were still pending and their hearing got pushed back again. Something about additional documentation and financial audits. I'm not holding my breath. I don't need to. Their names don't scare anybody around here anymore. If anything, they're punchlines. HOA board members flinch when someone mentions natural slope harmony. I consider that justice. I'm back to teaching. Back to walking the dog. Back to reading on the porch without worrying that the hill's gonna swallow me whole. But I did leave one thing up behind the new wall. A little sign. Nothing fancy, just metal on a post, tucked halfway behind a shrub. Don't touch my wall. Seriously. I haven't had a single issue since.